Because Rousseau hypothesizes that the government's job is to do what's in the general will. Not just to protect rights, but to do what's in the general will of the population. And so therefore, many historians look at Rousseau's ideas as this sort of foundation of the Republican ideas of the French Revolution and onward. These ideas that the government should be responding to the people, that the government should be of the people, by the people, for the people. That's what Lincoln says that. And of course, we hear this all the time in American discussions about how the people support something, or how the population's against something. Public support. And this is reflecting that idea that the government should be doing things that people want, that's in people's best interest or their general will. So what exactly is Rousseau's idea? Well, he writes this in The Social Contract. That's the name of his book. So social contract we've seen with Hobbes and Locke, and Rousseau has a different one. Rousseau's social contract is between the people. It creates a government that does the general will of the people. And the people submit to that general will. Because what's in the general will of the people ultimately is in their best interests and gives them, according to Rousseau, ultimate freedom. Okay, once again, the social contract is between the people to create a government. The government responds to the general will of the people, and the people submit to that general will. They follow that. Because what's in the general will is what's in their overall best interest as a people. Rousseau is interestingly dealing with this dynamic. The individual who has liberty and the reality that people live in communities in which they interact with one another. If individuals have complete liberty, then the community is horrific because everyone is driving 100 miles an hour and doing whatever they want. But if people have if the community is completely dominant, then there's no liberty. So how do we reconcile these two? And his answer is, well, we create a community system that does what's in the best interest of the people. Therefore, the people, their general will is being put into action by the community. And so they need to follow it. They need to follow that general will. And that ultimately is best for them. Yeah?
How does the government determine general will?
Well, it's kind of complicated, right? That's the hard thing, right? And so obviously Stalin has a very different interpretation of general will than American leaders have had.
Does Rousseau take a stance on it, though?
Rousseau kind of tries to explain this, and it's a very complicated formula in his writings that most people look at and think exactly what you're thinking. How is this practically put into action? And there's no magic formula. That's what we found. And that's why Rousseau is someone that both Democrats and demagogues have referred to. Right? The Democrats that say, we're doing this in the general will of the people, and the authoritarian dictators that are saying the same thing. Robespierre during the French Revolution, for example, that say, this is in the general will. We are creating a republic of virtue, this ideal community where people will get along. This is that Rousseauian idea. And so that justifies the terror in his mind. So this is the dilemma, is figuring out what is the general will. And if you figure that out, you'll be a very successful politician. Yes?
I'm kind of confused. Is what he's writing about in the social contract, is that like a real government, or is it just one he wants?
It's his hypothetical government. But it influences governments later on. Democratic governments that argue that they're doing what's in the general will of the people. And so the American Constitution begins with we the people, right? And this idea that it is a Republican government representing the interests of the people. That's sort of referring to a Rousseauian idea. Also, we see Rousseau's ideas about doing what's in the general will used by dictators like Robespierre, or later on. Communist leaders say, well, we're doing this in the best interest of the people. Okay. So moving now on to the 19th century isms. The 19th century, or 1800s, is the hardest part, I think, of the course, right? Because we've got so much happening. Now, if you remember, yesterday or today, we were discussing socialism throughout the century. And I pointed out, there's a lot of pizza here, by the way. It looks good. I pointed out that if you're just writing about these different variants of socialism, you're merely identifying them. You're not analyzing them successfully unless you talk about the context of the 19th century. Why socialism is saying these, why socialists are arguing these things throughout the century. How are they responding to the conditions actually on the ground? That shows analysis. So likewise, that's what we'll be doing as we're going through these isms. Hopefully we'll be making connections to what's going on in the 19th century. And what's going on in the 19th century is the industrialization of Europe, beginning with Britain in the late 18th century and spreading to the continent in the first half of the 19th century. After Napoleon, we have industrialization. And with industrialization, we have urbanization and a transformation of how people are living. Therefore, people are going to be in much more crowded quarters, in close proximity with more people, and ideas will spread more easily. Because people are living close to each other, schooling will be much easier to access, and as the century progresses, schooling will become more common and eventually mandatory for children. Access to other people, access to education, means access to ideas. And so the 19th century is a century in which ideas will ripple throughout Europe, challenging the traditional order. Now the order of the 19th century, let's jump down to where it says conservatism. The order of the 19th century is conservative in the first half. The governments, if you remember, we said the allusion is to a dam holding back a flood of ideas, that these torrents of ideas that are coming out of the French Revolution. And so the governments that are conservative are trying to maintain the traditional order. Remember, our one word for conservative is tradition. So sing that song from Fiddler on the Roof. Great, great. So what do we mean then by tradition? We mean three things. The king, the monarchy, the church, and the nobles. Those elements of the traditional feudal society. What's remarkable is how up to this point in the course, we've seen the tensions between kings and nobles. And those tensions have been brutal, they've been deadly, causing wars. They even led to the French Revolution, where the nobles would not submit to additional taxes, and therefore provoked the calling of the States General, which resulted in the National Assembly breaking off, etc., etc. So, kings and nobles have been rivals up to this turning point in history, this sort of beginning of the 19th century, at which point they find that they're very close allies. Because now there's new ideas about natural rights and equality for all persons, ideas about nationalism, which we'll talk about. And so these ideas will therefore challenge that traditional feudal order. And so kings and nobles now are going to be allies in defending their historic rights against these new ideas. So examples of conservative leaders in the 19th century. We can look at Metternich in Austria, who's the leader of Austria from the Napoleonic era, the minister of Austria from the Napoleonic era, oversees the Congress of Vienna, and is in charge all the way up to 1848, when, in a revolt in Vienna, he flees. This is why he's sort of the dynamic leader or leading statesman of this era. Sometimes we hear this referred to, this era of conservative government, holding back, resisting these reforms. We sometimes refer to it as the Age of Metternich.